The night sky burned green when he landed. The horizon split open with streaks of fire and static, the air thick with the scent of melting metal and rain that never quite reached the ground. The ship had been silent for hours. Before the crash only, the warning lights blinking in a slow rhythm like a dying heartbeat. He had held onto the control panel long after the engine's failed fingers, numb eyes on the flickering monitor where unfamiliar constellations drifted by like ghosts of forgotten worlds. When the ship hit the ground, it screamed a sound too human for a machine, and then all was still except the slow drip of coolant and the faint hiss of something burning inside. The vents. He pulled himself free, the doorway twisted and hot edges slicing into his palms, but he did not stop. He could not afford to stop. His left arm was glowing faintly beneath the torn sleeve, a pale blue light pulsing like something alive beneath his skin. He stumbled through the wreckage, smoke coiling around him, the taste of copper and dust on his tongue. He was not sure what planet this was, not sure if he had even reached the right sector, but he knew one thing: he could not stay here. The air was thin and sharp. His body ached in places he did not have names for anymore. He followed the flicker of distant signs, neon and shifting symbols that bent and shimmered as if refusing to be read. The city rose out of the fog ahead, a forest of glass and light towers leaning into the clouds, their surfaces alive with alien advertisements, faces of creatures with too many eyes smiling in endless loops. He moved toward the glow each step, leaving a faint print of light on the ground that faded slowly behind him. The locals saw him pass. Some stared, some turned away, some pretended not to see at all. He could not blame them. He looked wrong here, a creature caught between two species belonging to neither. He reached the base of a wide avenue lined with what looked like clinics, though the symbols above the doors were strange, jagged curves of color that seemed to hum softly when he stared at them. One of them had a mark shaped almost like the human symbol for medicine. He pressed his hand against the door. It opened with a sigh of cold air inside. The light was clean and blue, the floor reflecting his tired face back at him. A figure floated behind the counter, tall and narrow, with limbs that shifted like liquid silver. Its voice came through a small machine that vibrated against the air in tones he could barely follow. He said, "Help, please," his words breaking halfway between his own tongue and theirs. The machine translated with a crackle, identifying him, cataloging him, scanning him, its light running up and down his body. The alien vet tilted its head, its eyes unreadably. It spoke, then calmed, detached. The translator murmured, "Treatment denied, species mismatch, unauthorized bioform." He did not understand at first, and then the meaning sank through the fog of exhaustion and pain. The alien vet had turned him away. He stood there for a long time as the door sealed shut behind him, the sound of his own breathing loud in the sterile blue air, the city outside humming with life that did not want him. And for the first time since the crash, he felt truly alone. He stepped out of the clinic, the night air cutting against his skin, colder than before, or maybe that was just the emptiness spreading from his chest. The streets shimmered under pale lights that moved like fish in water, the whole city alive and watching, but silent in the way only cities built by someone else could be. He pulled his torn sleeve tighter over the wound, the glow dimming but not fading. It pulsed in slow waves through his arm, the rhythm uneven like a broken signal trying to reach home. He walked without knowing where. The ground under him thrummed faintly as if the metal veins of the city itself had a heartbeat. He passed a group of creatures, their skin translucent like jellyfish, their eyes bright and curious. They stopped to look at him, but when he looked back they turned away, whispering in tones that felt like ripples in the air. He wondered if they too had been turned away once, or if they had always belonged here in this cold light, this organized silence. Above him the sky flickered with floating transports, sleek bodies of silver and glass moving in perfect lines. He remembered when the sky back home used to burn orange at dusk, when the air was thick with dust and warmth and the sound of old engines. He missed the smell of fuel, the grit of soil under his nails, the noise of people who shouted not because they hated but because they were alive. The memory hurt more than the wound. He stopped at the edge of a narrow bridge that arched over what looked like a river, but the water moved wrong, slower, heavier, almost metallic. He leaned on the railing, feeling the vibration of passing energy beneath it. His reflection stared back, fractured in the current, a blur of human lines twisted by alien light. He barely recognized himself. The face was thinner, the eyes darker, the mark on his arm spreading faintly beneath the skin, glowing through the sleeve like a heartbeat that refused to stop. A sound reached him, faint at first, then clearer, the low hum of a door opening across the street, followed by a soft voice calling out, not in alien tongue but in the rough familiar shape of human language. He turned slowly, unsure if he had imagined it. There was a small building at the corner, plain metal walls, faded letters, and a language he knew, clinic. The word flickered weakly on the sign above the door. He crossed the street, each step slower than the last, his breath clouding in the strange air. When he reached the entrance, he hesitated a moment, then pushed the door open. The bell above it gave a soft, tired chime, the kind made by real metal, not the synthetic sounds outside. Inside, the light was warmer, a dull amber glow from lamps that hummed quietly. Against the walls the smell hit him first, antiseptic and something faintly sweet, coffee maybe, and the soft rustle of paper, the kind of smell that meant people worked here, not machines. A woman stood behind a counter, her hair tied back, loose strands catching the lamplight. She looked up, startled at first, then her eyes softened. She did not ask who he was or what he was made of. She just said, "Sit down, let me see her." His voice was rough with exhaustion, but there was something in it steady and real. He felt the weight in his chest shift a little lighter, not gone, but lighter. He sat because his legs would no longer hold him, and for the first time since the crash he felt that maybe someone in this strange world might still see him, not as something to be scanned or turned away, but as something still worth saving. The room was small, cluttered with tools and bottles and stacks of folded cloths, the kind of space built for work, not for beauty. Yet everything inside carried a quiet order that made it feel safe. The air was warmer here, touched by the hum of old machines that still breathed with purpose. The human vet moved through it like someone who knew every inch of it, her steps soft, her hands steady, her coat wrinkled and stained at the edges from too many nights spent fighting for lives that would not her own. He watched her from the chair, the light flickering above him, her face half-shadowed, her eyes lined with the kind of tiredness that comes not from age but from caring too much. She pulled a tray close to the metal, clinking softly, and asked, "Where does it hurt?" Her words simple, no translator, no filter. He tried to answer, but the sound that came out was broken, rough, a mixture of syllables and static. She did not flinch, just nodded, as if she understood anyway. She knelt beside him, her hands hovering before touching his arm, the sleeve torn and slick with strange light. She looked at it with the calm curiosity of someone who had seen everything from shattered bones to bleeding hearts. She said softly, "You are not from here, are you?" He shook his head, and for the first time the truth felt lighter in the open air. Her eyes met his, and there was no fear, only the quiet recognition of something fragile still trying to survive it. The wound pulsed faintly under her touch, the glow spreading like veins of light across his skin. She reached for a scanner, an old human model scratched and dented the display, blinked uncertain, then failed. She muttered under her breath but kept working, using her hands. Instead, gauze cloth pressure movement. Her voice, a rhythm beneath it all. "Easy, buddy, stay with me." Her words slow and deliberate, like a heartbeat. She pressed against the wound and he gasped, not from pain but from the strange rush of warmth spreading from her palms. Outside, the city lights flashed through the window, distant thunder from transport lanes rumbling like a second heartbeat above them. She did not look up, even as the power flickered. She stayed focused, her breath, even her hands, moving with the quiet grace of repetition. She asked him his name or something close to it. He tried to tell her the sound unfamiliar to human tongues. She smiled and said, "That is a good name. I will remember it," though he knew she probably could not pronounce it. For a moment he forgot the crass, the rejection, the cold voice of the alien vet. He forgot the endless corridors of strange cities where no one met his eyes. Here, in this small human space filled with warmth and coffee and light, he felt something anchor him back into the world. She finished dressing the wound, her touch lingering a second longer than needed, and when she met his eyes again she said softly, "Easy, buddy. You are going to be all right." He wanted to believe her. He wanted to think that maybe the universe had not given up on him, that maybe somewhere between the stars and the silence, there were still people who would reach out a hand even when they did not understand what they were saving. The storm outside had grown louder, the air trembling, as if the city itself was restless. The lights in the hallway flickered, throwing long shadows across the floor, but inside the small clinic, everything stayed calm. The human vet moved quietly around the room, her steps soft, her voice lower than the hum of the machines. She was checking the wound again, her fingers tracing the faint shimmer beneath his skin. She said, "The light, it moves like it is alive." He wanted to tell her it was, but the words tangled before they could leave his throat. She brought a new bandage, her hand shaking only a little. She said, "You are lucky you came here. The asses would have sent you to containment." He did not need to ask what that meant. He had seen containment before, clean rooms that smelled of acid and silence, places where strange bodies went in and never came out. Her eyes flicked up at him as if she could hear the thought, though he had said nothing out loud. She said, I have seen the files. The alien vet does not treat outsiders. They say it is against the code. He asks why slowly, the word rough but clear. She shrugged. Because they can, because no one tells them not to. She pulled the light closer to her face, studying the pulse beneath the bandage, then added, and because they stopped feeling a long time ago. He thought about the alien vet floating above the floor, voice like glass, words shaped by rules instead of mercy. He wondered what it would take for a being to choose precision over compassion. Maybe it happened slowly, maybe it was easier to stop caring when the world never thanked you for trying. The human vet straightened, stretching her back. She poured something dark into a cup and handed it to him. It smelled bitter and human. Coffee, she said, the good kind, not the synthetic stuff they sell up street. He took it, the warmth spilling through his hands. He had never tasted anything like it before. It was harsh and strange, but it burned in a way that made him feel alive. He looked at her and saw how the light caught in her hair, how the lines on her face deepened when she smiled. Tired, but she leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. She said, I used to work with them, the alien vets, the advanced ones. They said humans were inefficient, too emotional, too messy. They were right, maybe, but sometimes messy saves lives. She looked down at her hands as if remembering something heavy, then said, I left before they could teach me to stop feeling. He did not know what to say, so he just nodded, the glow beneath his skin softening the pain, easing into a dull ache. Outside the storm was fading, the green light thinning into mist. He could see through the window the alien city stretching endlessly, towers like ribs reaching for the sky. He thought about the distance between this small clinic and the great halls of the alien medical towers, and how strange it was that the only warmth in this world came from a tired human with a soft voice and coffee that smelled like burnt dreams. She turned back to him, checked the monitors, though most of them were broken, and said, I do not know what you are, but you are hurt, and that is enough reason for me to help. He watched her mouth form the words, and something inside him loosened, as if the long cold silence of the universe had cracked just a little around the sound of her voice. He woke sometime later, the room dim, the hum of the machines bluffed now, as if they too were resting, the air thick with the scent of coffee and sterilized cloth. His arm ached, but the pain had dulled into something distant, almost bearable. He turned his head slowly. The human vet was asleep at her desk, her head resting on her folded arms, her hair loose and tangled in the low light. She looked younger, softer, the kind of tired that does not come from work but from carrying too much alone. He watched her for a long moment, unsure why the sight of her breathing quietly made the space around him feel less emptied. Rain had started again outside. It fell in sheets against the windows, the drops glowing faintly as they caught the reflection of the city lights. He could hear the low murmur of traffic, the rhythmic thrum of engines above it all, the faraway whisper of alien voices that seemed to move through the storm like static. The world outside still cold, still distant, but inside the clinic it felt like another planet entirely. Smaller, yes, but alive in a different way. He sat up slowly, his movement waking her. She blinked, her eyes heavy with sleep, and gave him a faint smile. You are still here, she said, half surprised, half relieved. He nodded, though the motion sent a faint sting through his arm. She stood and stretched, reaching for a tablet on the counter. Its screen cracked, but still working. She checked his vitals with a soft hum of approval. Your pulse is stable. Your temperature human enough, she said with a dry chuckle. He did not understand the humor, but he liked the sound of her voice. It reminded him of warmth, not from stars or engines, but from something living, something that could look at another creature and not see date or threat. She handed him a cup of water, her fingers brushing his for a second. He felt the pulse of her warmth run up his skin, where her touch met his, and for the first time since he left his homeworld he did not feel foreign. She asked where he came from, her tone gentle, not demanding. He tried to answer, but the words caught again, the language barrier thick as fog between them. She only nodded again, as if the silence itself told her enough. She said, It does not matter really. You are here now, that is what matters. The words simple but heavy with something he could not name, something close to belonging, maybe. Something close to forgiveness. A sound from outside cut through the moment, the sharp metallic clang followed by the faint echo of footsteps. The human vet froze, her eyes narrowing. She whispered, They will come looking for you. You should not have been turned away. Without record, the alien vet will report the anomaly. He understood enough of her words to feel the chill crawl up his spine. He looked toward the window, the shapes in the distance blurred but moving. She walked quickly to the door and locked it, the click loud in the quiet room. Then turned back to him, her voice lower. Now if they come, you hide. Do you understand? He nodded, though the idea of hiding made his chest tighten. He had hidden all his life in one form or another. She took a deep breath and said softly, "Easy, buddy, we will get through this together." And for the first time the words did not just sound like comfort, they sounded like a promise. The sound outside grew louder, steady footsteps. Come, measured, deliberate, the kind that belonged to officials, not wanderers. The human vet moved quickly around the small room, dimming the lights. Pulling a curtain across the window, she whispered, "Stay quiet," her voice steady, but her hands trembled. Just slightly. He could see the pulse beating fast in her throat. She pointed toward the back room. A narrow space lined with old storage crates and broken equipment. He slipped inside, the shadows swallowing him, the faint glow from his arm hidden beneath a strip of cloth. Through the thin wall he could hear voices, metallic and clipped, the alien tongue translated by machines, each word sharp and cold. Authorization confirmed, record, search in progress. They were searching for him. He pressed his hand to the wound, through the bandage, felt it pulse against his palm, the rhythm unsteady, the light under his skin faint but alive. He closed his eyes and listened to her voice outside. She was calm, deliberate, answering questions with the careful ease of someone who had dealt with danger before. She said, "Yes, he came through last night. No, he was not registered. Yes, I informed Central. No, he did not stay long." Her words woven with just enough truth to sound believable. The translator crackled and hissed, then silence, then the metallic voice again, scanning, sequence complete. Her breath hitched, barely audible. She said, "Of course, check anywhere you like." Footsteps moved through the main room, closer to the wall where he hid. He could hear the faint hum of scanners, the slow, deliberate whir. As they passed over the door, he held his breath, time stretching thin around him every second. Heavy and slow, the scanner stopped, then moved away. One of the aliens spoke again, this one lower, more mechanical. They said, "Contamination. Risk moderate, contain if located." Her reply was sharp, firmer than before. "No risk here, the place is clean." The voice paused, the air thick enough to taste, then another hum, softer, more distant. The machines receding, footsteps fading into the rain outside. The door clicked. The silence after them louder than their presence had been. He waited a long moment before stepping out. She stood by the counter, her shoulders slumped, her breath unsteady. She ran a hand through her hair and said, "They will come again, they always do." He watched her hands shaking slyly as she picked up the same cup from earlier, taken a sip that did nothing to calm her. He wanted to thank her, but words felt too small for what she had done. Instead, he placed his hand over his chest, the old sign of gratitude from his world, a gesture without sound. She smiled faintly, then sank into a chair, rubbing her eyes. She said, "I should have sent you away like they did, but I could not. You looked too lost, and maybe I have been lost too long myself." He sat across from her, the storm outside still muttering against the windows, the faint glow of his wound lighting the air between them, soft blue against her tired gold. He said softly, "Thank you," the words rough but clear. She looked up and said, "Easy, buddy, rest now." And he did, trusting her voice more than the silence beyond the walls. Morning came slow and gray. The rain had faded, leaving streets slick and shining under the pale alien light. He lay on the narrow cot at the back of the clinic, muscles sore but the dull ache comforting in its constancy. The human vet moved around the room, quietly tidying instruments and wiping down surfaces. She hummed softly a tune he could not place, yet it carried warmth like sunlight on stone. She glanced at him over her shoulder, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Good. You are still breathing," she said, simple words heavy with meaning. He wanted to speak, but the language caught in his throat, so he just nodded, watching her every movement. The way her fingers lingered on the edge of a tray as if feeling its history. The way she adjusted the light above the cot and the faint creak of the chair as she settled back into it all. Gestures small but deliberate, careful, with a purpose. He had never seen anyone move with such human tenderness in a world built on precision and cold calculation. She came closer and held a cup of water out to him. "Drink slowly," she said. He took it, his fingers brushing hers for a fleeting moment, warmth spreading along his arm. Her eyes held his in silent understanding, not needing words to communicate the gravity of trust and survival in the spaces between them. She said, "Do you understand that you are safe here?" For now he nodded again, still unsure how to convey the gratitude that felt too large for his chest. Outside, the city moved, oblivious to the small acts of rebellion inside the clinic. Vehicles glided past, towers stretched into the clouds, creatures of all shapes and sizes passed beneath, neon signs flickering with messages and images he could not decipher, the hum of their lives distant yet intimate, the world beyond cold and unfeeling. But here in this small room, he felt tethered to something fragile and human, something that could not be quantified or scanned. The human vet knelt beside him, checking the bandage, once more her hands steady as always, her eyes catching his faint glow and studying the pulse beneath. She said, "We must keep it covered for now," and he felt her care like a shield. Against the indifference outside, she reached for a small device, an old scanner flickering with light. She tested it over his arm, not for measurement but for reassurance for them both. He could feel her breath soft against the air as she murmured, "Easy, buddy, it is okay." Long silence settled between them, the kind that speaks of understanding without sound. The storm of last night seemed distant, a memory only tangible in the faint hum of the city outside. The quiet of the room wrapped them in a fragile cocoon of safety. He studied her face, the lines of fatigue softened by the curve of her smile, the warmth of her presence grounding him in a way he had not expected. She moved to the counter, pouring another cup of coffee, her hands steady despite the weariness in her shoulders. She turned and said, "Sit and rest your knees to regain strength." The words were simple yet carried the weight of protection and care. He complied, sinking back into the cot, the soft mattress cradling him. He watched her as she carried out small tasks, each movement deliberate and precise, a symphony of quiet resilience that made him feel less alone in the vast alien world. The sun struggled through the clouds, pale and uncertain light spilling over the city towers, casting long shadows across the wet streets. He lay on the cat, feeling the dull warmth of the bandage beneath his arm and the faint pulse of the glow that had begun to slow. The UN vet moved around the room, her steps soft, her eyes sharp yet gentle, every movement deliberate as if she was tracing a path through the air itself. She knelt beside him again, her hands warm and steady, and said, "Easy, buddy, breathe with me." He followed her instructions, the words strange but soothing, the rhythm of her voice, a tether anchoring him in the small room, away from the indifference of the city outside. The pain had ebbed almost completely, leaving a quiet ache that reminded him he was still alive. She touched his forehead with the back of her hand, checking for fever, her eyes softening as she said, "Good, you are holding steady." Outside, the hum of the alien city pressed against the walls, vehicles gliding like silverfish across the sky, the faint murmur of crowds, distant voices trading words. He did not understand the memory of the alien vet still sharp in his mind, their cold eyes, the clipped voice of the translator, a reminder of what he had escaped. He looked at her and wanted to ask how she had the courage to stay gentle in a world so ruthless, but the words tangled again. She poured a cup of coffee, Heron's careful not to spill, and offered it to him. He hesitated, but took it. The warmth burned his fingers and throat in a way that made him feel human. The bitter taste, strange but grounding. She watched him sip slowly and said, "See, you are stronger than you think." The faint curve of her lips, a quiet reassurance. He could feel something shift inside him, trust blooming fragile and tentative in the small space they shot. She checked his vitals again, the scanner flickering dimly, the numbers strange to him but the meaning clear in her nod and soft murmur, "Good enough." She placed her hand over his on the cot, pressing gently, the gesture a silent promise of protection. Her eyes held his and said, "Do not worry, I will not let them take you, not here, not now." He felt the weight of her words settle like a shield around his chest, the pulse beneath his skin steadying as if it had learned the rhythm of her voice. For the first time since the crash, he allowed himself to relax, completely letting his body sink into the cot and his mind into the quiet warmth of her presence. The storm of fear and rejection fading into the distant hum of the city, the glow beneath his skin. A gentle reminder that he had survived, that he was not alone here, that even in a world ruled by indifference, there were still hands willing to touch gently, still voices willing to speak softly, still hearts willing to care. She adjusted the blanket over him, her fingers brushing his arm lightly, and whispered, "Easy, buddy, rest. Now we have time before they come again." And he closed his eyes, feeling the trust solidify. A fragile bond between them, stronger than the fear outside, stronger than the cold logic of the alien world, a quiet promise that in the small light of this room he was not invisible, he was seen and he was safe. The light in the clinic was soft, now golden through the thin curtains that barely held back the morning haze. He lay on the cot, the pulse beneath his skin slow and steady, a gentle rhythm that matched the calm of the human vet moving quietly around the room. She carried a small tray of food and set it down beside him, her movements careful, precise yet gentle, the scent of it warm and familiar in a way that made his stomach ache with longing. He looked at her, the small gestures of care filling the spaces the alien world had left empty. She knelt beside him, checking the bandage one last time, her fingers brushing lightly across his arm. He flinched at first, then relaxed, the touch grounding him in the quiet warmth of the room. She said, "Easy, buddy, you made it this far," and he wanted to believe her, the words simple but heavy, carrying the promise of safety. She poured another cup of coffee and handed it to him, the steam curling against his face, the bitter taste grounding him further. In this fragile world, she smiled, tired but real. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent towers gleaming above streets that shimmered with life. He thought of the alien vet, the cold voice, the rejection, the scants and the refusal, and yet here in this small room with her he felt something unfamiliar, a fragile trust that pulsed beneath his skin, stronger than the fear of what might come next. He sipped the coffee and felt the warmth spread into his chest, into the hollow spaces left by hours of running and hiding. She sat back against the counter, watching him with eyes that had seen too much yet chosen to care. She said, "We are safe for now." He nodded, though the words felt too small for the weight of relief that settled in his chest. She reached out her hand again, and he took it this time, without hesitation, the pulse beneath his skin slowing as if it had learned the rhythm of her presence. The small warmth of her hand, enough to make the cold of the alien world recede. They sat together, in quiet companionship, the rain outside gone, leaving streets shining, and still the hum of the city, a distant murmur, the glow beneath his skin, fading to a gentle shimmer. He closed his eyes and let himself feel it, the exhaustion, the relief, the fragile trust he had learned to place in another creature, the human vet watching over him, a guardian against the indifference beyond the walls. For a long time they said nothing, only shared the small space, the soft light and the quiet hum of life. In a world that could be cold and unyielding, yet inside the clinic it was different. It was warmth, it was care, it was a fragile bond built from nothing but presence and patience. She whispered, "Easy, buddy. Rest now," and he let himself drift for the first time in days, feeling seen, feeling safe, feeling that maybe somewhere in the vast indifferent universe someone would still choose to care. When he finally slept, the human vet watched him, a faint smile on her lips, her hand resting gently near his arm, the pulse beneath his skin slow and steady, the small glow like a heartbeat against the quiet of the room. The city outside, vast and unfeeling, but here within these walls he had found sanctuary. A fragile world built from kindness and quiet, determination, a place where he could breathe, where he could exist and know that he was not alone.